Well, hello and welcome, and thank you for joining with me in another series of our daily devotionals. And of course, today, November 25th, Thanksgiving is coming up this week. And I pray that you'll have an opportunity to spend it with friends and families and loved ones. And I hope and pray that you're not spending it alone. But if you are, then I pray that God will help you have a great time anyway. I don't know. What do? Go see a movie? So find some people to hang out with, and I think you'll find it be a lot more enjoyable. I think there's nothing harder than being alone, and it's one of the reasons my wife doesn't really encourage me to travel as much as I used to, because when the kids were around, families around, it wasn't so bad. But now that all of our kids have flown the nest and are all over the country, it's just it gets really lonely. And so I hope that you're not alone. I hope that at the very least, this little conversation that we have every day will be something that will help brighten your day and bring a little joy. And I would just simply say, if you're someone who knows somebody who doesn't have anybody to share that wonderful day with, that this would be a great opportunity to do it. And I think you'll find it will not only bless them, but it will probably enrich your life as well. As for us, we're flying to Tennessee to see our kids, our grandkids, and we try to do that about every other year so we can spend Thanksgiving with them. And so we look forward to that, of course, every time. But we've been looking at First Peter chapter 5, and we're really kind of getting close to the end of the book. In fact, it's a real possibility that we'll actually conclude our study of First Peter. And where do we go next? Well, I think the obvious is we'll probably pick it up in Second Peter and begin going through that little book, which is one of my more fun books to study in the New Testament. It's just a rich and full of all sorts of delightful tidbits of spiritual wisdom and insight and counsel and guidance. But where we left off last week on Friday was with Peter's exhortation. In verse 8, he said that we need to be self-controlled, we need to be alert, because he says we have an enemy, and that enemy is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And one of the things that we need to always keep in mind, we don't have a lot of personal familiarity with lions or how they hunt, but what I do know about lions is they tend to rely upon stealth. They're not the fastest creature on earth. They're one of the strongest, of course, but what they do is they rely upon stealth. They sneak up and hope to be unseen and unnoticed, and then they often spring on their prey, many times with a great roar. The roar is designed to paralyze the victim that's going to be caught. And you think about it sometimes how a very loud noise suddenly will shock you and leave you in a moment of paralysis. Well, I think there's a lot to derive from that, because when you realize that how the enemy oftentimes hits us with things that we hadn't anticipated, we didn't see them coming, and oftentimes we're caught off guard by the problems that will arise in our life. At least I know that's true in my life and my wife's life. We often look dealing with things we thought, we never saw this coming. We never anticipated this. And the first reaction is always to be startled or to be a little afraid, stressed out, feel tension and all that sort of stuff. You feel the adrenaline pumping through your system. But it's always important at that point to step back and really pray. And that's part of where we find that Peter goes on and he says, resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of suffering. Part of this goes back to what Peter said earlier, that we shouldn't think about these kind of difficulties as being strange or unusual. In fact, so much of the theme, as we've talked about in First Peter, is dealing with the issue of suffering in the life of God's people. That too many times, especially within our culture, we have the concept that if I'm faithful to the Lord, then I won't go through difficulties, I won't have suffering, I won't have loss. And, you and I might wish that was the case, but the reality is that the only way that God can really bring about growth and maturity and really bringing us to a place where we're displaying the nature of Christ is where we find ourselves falling into a state of total dependency upon Him. And I'm like you, I don't like being totally dependent. I would like to see myself as being independent and self-sufficient. But too many of us already know that as we age, we begin to find that physical things and limitations, even intellectually, mentally, begin to affect us. And we have to rely upon others to help us finish the tasks of what things that come into our life. And eventually that will come to a point probably of significant dependency. And that's viewed as being the worst of situations. You find that everybody, all these people are taking all sorts of health benefits and supplements and everything in the world they could think of to keep the aging process at bay. And I'm not totally against that, and I'm criticizing that even, but we know that it's an investment of diminishing returns. It's only a matter of time when the vehicle will wear out, the vessel will crack and begin to leak. And as a consequence, we have to recognize that this is part of the kind of the Mandela of life. It's where life begins and ends. And so we need to recognize that the more we learn to depend upon the Lord early in life, the more effective we are when we really are dependent and we have to look to God. And it's interesting because even though God will bring into our life people who will bless us and help us, at the same time, we find that sometimes God just wants us to trust Him for taking care of a situation. I'm thinking about something even today that I'm so blessed by, because I found the last time I tried to climb up on my roof to clean the pine needles out, it was a little bit frightening because I didn't have the physical balance or strength that I used to have to hop around roofs, and especially steep ones like mine. And, I mentioned that in one of my daily podcasts, and a young man in our congregation, a young teenager, came up to me and said, "I want to come and clean your roof for you. I like climbing on roofs." And I talked to his mom about it, and I thought, wow, this is really, really wonderful, because I've been sitting there figuring out, okay, how am I going to take care of this, and get this taken care of? And God knew my need. He knew my prayer, and he responded up by putting it on someone's heart to bring a blessing into our life in that way. And I use that as an illustration because I think that's kind of the way it works when we learn to start praying and trusting the Lord and depending upon Him. Because I find that more and more that the world is becoming increasingly complicated and difficult. And as you age, some of us have trouble keeping up with technology and the pace at which it moves. And it's so wonderful that then when you have people around you who will help you out with those sorts of things. It's also sort of humbling. I think many times when I'm trying to do something on my phone and one of my grandkids will say, "Here, Grandpa, let me fix it." And they whip through it in a millisecond and got it taken care of. And I was sitting there punching away. And I couldn't have gone faster if my life depended on it. So, it's this thing that we have to really get past, this idea of being in control and self-sufficient, and to realize that part of the blessing of life is allowing other people to be a blessing to you, other people to help you carry some of the loads that come with the reality of getting older and more infirmed. And that's why when he says that we need to recognize that we have an enemy who wants to terrify us and paralyze us so that we don't know what to do and we begin to kind of act in a kind of hysteria, he says you need to understand that we've been given the grace by God, he says, to resist him and to stand firm. And I love these two words, because the word resist here in the original means to really stand, set your feet in place and be prepared to take the blow. Like a blocker in a football game who's kind of gets into a crouch and just meets the onrushing defensive player. It's holding your ground. It's really reminiscent of what the Roman soldiers were trained in, because their real key was the fact that not only were they really well trained, but they were trained to hold their formations and to fight as a fighting unit and to fight as a unit in unison. And so they gave them these boots or sandals, they called them caligias, which were basically kind of a boot sandal that had spikes in the bottom so they could plant their feet in the ground, and they would let the enemy charge at them with everything. And then when the enemy would hit, they would just simply hold them back with their pikes or their spears or their little swords, their gladiuses, and they would poke away at them. And usually they said an attacking enemy would really be able to sustain about 3 charges before they finally became exhausted and began to retreat. And then they would in a very disciplined way, they would begin to move forward steadily until they had cleared the ground of their enemy. So that's kind of this idea of resisting him and standing firm, having our feet firmly implanted in the things of God so that we aren't quickly knocked off our balance. And the more we learn to do that, the more mature we become, where we don't go into a panic or don't overreact to a situation, the more stability we'll find in our own personal life and the more victories that we'll recognize are taking place. I'm not saying that you don't have victories, but many times we're so caught up in the moment, we don't even see how God is bringing great victories into our lives. Well, I'll continue this, and if I keep on talking like this, it's not a very good chance we'll finish the book this week, but we'll see what happens. God bless you. Have a great day, and look forward to joining with you tomorrow.